In 1998, the moderator of the United Church, the Right Reverend Bill Phipps, offered words that many people have wanted to hear for a very long time. He said, "On behalf of the United Church of Canada, I apologize for the pain and suffering that our church's involvement in the Indian residential school system has caused."
The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country.
God bleeds at anger's fist, at trust betrayed, at women murdered.
For the many who didn't come home, who would have been grandparents and elders today, we remember their light and the injustice they felt being born into a world of such bleakness and pain. A pain their families felt when they didn't come home.
At running swords, at creatures dying without cause, until we change the way we care, God cries.
And yet this is where we're at. This is the moment in Canadian history that I think will define us for several generations. Are we finally willing to listen to the truth from the elders and dismantle the systems that made it so? I think we see signs of it. I think the fact we're all wearing orange is a sign. I might be naive, but I think we can. It takes action to go with it.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this, our evening prayer experience for September 30th, 2021, Orange Shirt Day, and the first day for truth and reconciliation in Canada. Today is a difficult day in lots of ways for many people. One of the experiences I had today was listening to elders and Indigenous people talk about how this was always Orange Shirt Day, and that somehow, once again, the federal government decided to layer something else on, force a name change. National Day for Reconciliation and Healing. In an interview with the founder of Orange Shirt Day this morning, I heard her say, "It will always be Orange Shirt Day. It can also be named other things, but it will always be Orange Shirt Day. It will always be a day set aside to reflect on the impact of the Canadian Indian residential school system, the systematic nature of its intent to remove and destroy Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis identity, land, culture, language, and the Church's complicit nature in being part of that program. One of the pieces I learned today was that the Indian residential school model in Canada was modeled after a similar program in the United States. The difference between the two countries is really that in the United States, the program was run by the military. In Canada, it was deemed that that would be too expensive for the military to run the Indian residential schooling programs. And so it was determined that the most cost-effective way to achieve the designated ends was to partner with the churches and have the churches run the various institutions. I thought I knew a lot about what Orange Shirt Day was all about about residential schools and about the church's involvement in it, particularly the involvement of our denomination, the United Church of Canada. Today was a reminder, even for someone like me, that there is still much to learn, much to hear, and much to listen to. I know that in our society there are lots of folks that don't believe the stories of the elders and the survivors from Indian residential schools. I know there are people that don't believe it was that bad and that there was some good that came out of it. That's not where I stand. I know there are folks that would say, you can't hold me responsible for what my ancestors did. I didn't do it myself. And I'm stuck wondering, at what point do we, the inheritors of the systems, the ones who have inherited the privileges that came along with it, at what point are we responsible? And maybe if not directly responsible, because perhaps that's not even the best word, but when are we accountable for continuing to perpetuate those systems? I've said many, many times that I cannot wrap my head around how there are reserves in Canada where you can't just turn the tap and get clean drinking water. I don't mean that water can't be trucked in. I don't mean that there aren't some workarounds to it, but that there are places in Canada where Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people can't do the very same thing that I take for granted every morning when I fill up the water tank to make my coffee. They can't just go to the sink, put the container there, turn on the cold water tap, and watch it fill with clean, clear, drinkable water. And that's just one example. I think it's hard for folks that haven't experienced generational trauma to understand the implications and the way it affects your everyday life. The way it rears its head in moments when you're unaware, unprepared. The ways in which it shapes your interactions with others, how it defines your relationships, your hopes, your dreams, your expectations of one another. How it makes it hard for you to trust, hard to parent, hard to be a kid, hard to be a relative, a friend, a neighbor. And then there's the reality of what happened in Canada on the 27th of May, 2021. It's the day of the realization by settler Canada of the reality that Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis elders have been telling us about for decades. It's the day the 215 were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School. I say discovered because I don't have a better word for it in English. It was a discovery in the sense that we didn't know for sure the bodies were there. We didn't know those graves existed. But the truth is that we did. We just didn't choose to listen. And so while it was a discovery for folks that look like me, for folks with a heritage like mine, it really wasn't a discovery. Just like we didn't discover the New World. But we didn't embrace the truth that was offered to us. We never thought that we could be wrong. That the colonial mentality could be mistaken. Today's been set aside as a commemorative day. I think it's completely inappropriate to think about it as a holiday or a day off from work. For me, it's more like Remembrance Day. It's a day set aside to remember, to pause, to reflect, and to act. I hope at some point this day you were able to do those three things: pause, reflect, and decide what action you're going to take. To commemorate Orange Shirt Day and live into a truth and reconciling reality in Canada. This is part of our history. It's part of our story, part of our narrative. It's woven into the DNA of our country in interesting and complex, subtle and obvious ways. And it's something we need to come to terms with. Not in a once and for all, there you go, we were there, we did it, pat us on the back. But begin the long, hard, challenging, rewarding, emotional journey of reconciliation with the goal of living into right relations with one another, with God and with creation. It's been a hard day. I think every time we have to come to terms with the fact that Canada isn't the nice, polite entity that we like to say it is. Somehow all of the tourism commercials don't quite reveal the whole thing. Every time we have to kind of look behind the curtain and see the hard truth, it's difficult. It's difficult when we have to do that for ourselves. It's difficult when we have to do it for our families, the churches we belong to, the institutions we participate in, the communities we live in, and the country we call home. And yet it's exactly what we need to do. Because that's the only way that people who look like me can do the work that they need to do. You see, reconciliation isn't about learning from Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people, or at least not just about learning. It is about listening and hearing the stories and the truths. It is about bearing witness to where the system has broken down and tried to eradicate culture and language. It is about listening and hearing about how land was taken, how people were dispossessed, pushed into smaller and smaller, less and less habitable, more and more undesired pieces of geography. The blanket exercise by Kairos, if you've never done it, is a perfect example of how that happened. But happen, it did. And the folks that have to come to terms with that aren't the ones that experienced it. They know it was real. They know it happened. They lived firsthand the long-term traumatic impacts of those policies and government and Canadian actions. The people that need to come to terms with it are you and me. The work that needs to be done in order to be reconciling, in order to live into right relations, is something that we have to do as individuals and as a community. We need to accept the realities of the systems and the privileges they've bestowed upon us. And then it's our job to change those systems, to make sure that how we move into the future is one where everybody gets the same advantages, the same privileges, the same potentials as everyone else. It's a quite Christian model in some ways, if you think about it. It's based on the premise that we hold all of this in common. And those that have share with those that don't, not begrudgingly, not resistingly, but with open hearts and open minds. Because that's what it means to love and care for your neighbor. On our website and on our social platforms, we shared some resources to help reflect, pause, and act. I hope you found them useful. And if you haven't had a chance to look at them, I hope you make some time. If not today, then tomorrow or the next day. Because here's the thing about reconciliation. It's not going to happen all at once simply because we broke out our orange shirts and the federal government named a special day. Reconciliation is going to happen because we choose to make it happen. We choose to do the hard work as individuals and as communities. We choose to find and make and engage in spaces that are inclusive and transforming. I want to share with you a piece of music I discovered today, a video of a piece of music. I invite us to watch it, and then from that we'll transition into prayer. The video was produced, written, put together. The whole thing is from the Scalp School of Excellence in Kamloops. The title is "We Won't Forget You," and it's performed by students at that school. For me, it provides a very helpful, powerful, and I'll warn you, somewhat emotional grounding for a place to begin the journey of reconciliation. So friends, on this Orange Shirt Day in 2021, let's take a moment to pause, to reflect, and act. Here's "We Won't Forget You."
Future unknown, forced into praying. secrets they're strong and dense. The pain they felt, let's honor that. By being great and keeping track of what elders teach, let's walk the path.
To Shuswap Nation, the future is in our hands. It may take some patience. It is our home, it is our land. In a lifetime we'll celebrate who we are like every day. There's so much knowledge in the way we live our lives, so we're giving thanks.
We won't forget you. We won't forget you. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Oh, cow cook beat, oh, cow cook beat. Found a love, now everything is fine. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light.
Now we feel free, dreaming and wishing. We walk on the land, hunting and fishing. Our language is taught through drumming and singing, but it's still so sad. Our people go missing. Is there an end to all of this madness? Finding the strength through all of this sadness. Put troubles aside, emotions we balance by showing our voices. We got the talent.
This is the start of a new life. We'll undo the wrongs and we'll choose right. Our home is here and it is so bright. We see the rivers on every side.
Bringing back the traditions, we sing the rap for the mission. The destination is living and innovation for the children.
In a lifetime we'll celebrate who we are like every day. There's so much knowledge in the way we live our lives, so we're giving thanks.
We won't forget you. We won't forget you. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Oh, cow cook beat, oh, cow cook beat. Found a love, now everything is fine. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Our school's a place we go. We feel safe and we feel better again. A home away from home. We're happy here and to be together again. You've shown there's always hope when tough times get you down. Let us begin and walk the longest road. We are here with you, we'll never forget. No, no, no. No, no, no. We'll never forget, never forget, never forget. We won't forget you. We won't forget you. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. Oh, cow cook beat, oh, cow cook beat. Found a love, now everything is fine. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light. You were sitting in the dark, now we're letting in the light.
Friends, let us join together in prayer. This evening's prayer will have a number of moments for silence, for us to pause, reflect, and think about how we might act. For each of those moments, we invite you to practice box breathing. You're going to inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold the exhale for 4 seconds. 4 seconds in, a 4-second hold, 4-second exhale, 4-second hold. If you can't do 4 seconds, we understand. Pick a timing that works for you and keep it the same for the pauses for your inhale and your exhale. Let's start by doing 3 box breaths together. And so in, hold, exhale, hold, in, hold, out, hold, in, hold, out, hold. O God, as we gather, we name the times we have misused your name, your presence, and replaced your call with our own. We have been so zealous to share the presence and word of your gospel that we didn't pause to ask if we were causing more damage than good, who was benefiting from the system being created, and what the generational trauma would be. We name and own that when European settlers came to Turtle Island, people created in your image were already here with vibrant languages, technologies, and cultures. We name and own that over generations, Turtle Island's original stewards were forced onto smaller and smaller pieces of land with fewer and fewer resources. We name and own that residential schools were a settler creation designed to destroy language and culture. We name and own that our ancestors removed children from their families and homes because of racist ideals. Many did not return home. Many died in residential school. Many were believed lost in unmarked graves. We name and own the systemic racism confronted by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people to this very day. We name and own it is not the responsibility of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people to dismantle this system. It is the responsibility of those who benefited and were privileged by it.